My name is Katie Spoden. I'm Assistant Director over at the Polsky Center. Today's workshop will be about setting up corporate and startup innovation partnerships for success. And we are very excited to welcome our facilitator today, CJ Przybyl, who is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Snapsheet. And he is also an alum from the Chicago Booth School of Business. CJ began working in mobile claims technology startups in 2011 when he helped lead the pivot of Body Shop Bids into Snapsheet. As a serial entrepreneur, CJ has co-founded multiple startups, including a mobile platform for fast food restaurants, a Bluetooth low energy software company for personal body networks, and a municipal biofuels cooperative. In terms of Q&A, feel free to put your questions for CJ in the chat feature, and we will get to those closer towards the end of the presentation. But with that, CJ, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, am I unmuted now? All right.
Yes, you are.
All right, step one, figure that out. All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I look forward to talking with you. So, as you said, I'm going to just talk through a little bit about corporate, startups and startup collaboration. So a little bit more about me, and thank you, Katie, for the introduction and for this opportunity. So did a undergrad in engineering, MBA at the University of Chicago, then worked in semiconductors and did a few startups before co-founding Snapsheet, which is pretty big scaled up company, over 400 employees, doing tech-enabled services and pure play SaaS technology platform. And what we'll focus on today, though, is kind of some of the area on the bottom here, where through the course of doing through Snapsheet, I've ended up doing just a lot of really large corporate relationships. So some examples like USAA, Generali Zurich, NVIDIA, Ping An in China, and just a whole host of others. I say 10 strategic partnerships, but I've probably done like 20 through this. We've also raised 100 million, and a lot of that has come from corporate strategic venture capital firms. So we've had a lot of experience working with corporates and strategics as an early stage insurtech and tech, just like startup, and as a later stage startup. After 10 years, I'm not sure what the line of when you're not a startup anymore is, but if somebody wants to chime in and tell me that one, I'm all ears. But today, talking a little bit about executing corporate partnerships with startups. I'm going to try to touch on both sides. I know we have some alumni and some folks in corporations and some students and some entrepreneurs on here. So I'll try to give equal time to both sides here. But initially we'll talk about laying the groundwork. So one thing that's kind of overlooked often is the culture. So focus a little bit on the culture and assessing the culture of organizations. Talk about some of the strategy differences of corporates and startups. Talk about finding partners, courting partners, and ways to partner. Then structuring the actual structuring of the deals. That'll be like a little wordy slide, but that's a pretty good information there. Then we'll hop into navigating the nuances and complexities of the actual people. So once we talk about the groundwork, really important things. But what it really comes down to is a lot of organizational issues and people are really what make any partnership happen. You're not just two contracts working with each other. It's just a bunch of people working together. So talk through a little bit of that. And then all of that's going to lead into the execution. And I'll offer just a couple little bullets there about some things to consider in daily execution that we've seen drive some success. So to start up, I mean, everything should have a little bit of philosophy and physics associated with it, in my opinion. So we'll kick it off with Zenos Paradox. And if anyone's familiar with this, it's a pretty good one. And I think it parallels, corporates and startups very well. But basically, the paradox goes that, Achilles is kind of like younger, ambitious, and he challenges this tortoise to a race, and he's so eager and kind of has a little bit of hubris, says, I'll just give you a huge head start and then I'll just blow past you. But what Zeno said way back in the day was, look, Achilles is actually never going to pass the tortoise because he gave the tortoise a head start. So By the time Achilles gets halfway to the tortoise is going to have moved. And then Achilles always has to get halfway to the tortoise. And then once he actually gets to where the tortoise was, the tortoise will have moved slightly. So Achilles focused on trying to catch up to the tortoise. He's never actually going to get there. And so, it's quite a good paradox. It really just depends on your frame of reference, right? So if you're looking at things like, you're just chasing someone's tail and trying to catch up to them. And in this example, you're a startup that's really ambitious versus a corporate that might have some, just real limitations. Depending upon how you frame the relationship, you may not be able to catch up to each other, right? So if you're just focusing on single points, and focusing on, you're behind and you're trying to catch up to the corporate, it's never going to work. And if you're a corporate and you think you're kind of way ahead and you've just got someone nipping at your heels, even when you're trying to partner, it's going to cause some issues. So the best thing to do together is to, align together at the starting line, avoid the distance, and make sure that you're working at the same pace. Because it doesn't do you any good to be just a really ambitious startup just running into the same brick wall, or to be a corporate that's just leaving your startup kind of in the dust, always nipping at your heels. So kicking this off, talking about culture, a couple of different things that I think are kind of some good groundwork. One is Pascal's levels of socialization here. And I picked this one up at the booth when I was there. Great framework. But basically, culture is derived actually pretty analytically. And we don't really think that very often, but there's a very analytical, levels to culture, which Pascal identified, which is, selecting your candidates, your socialization, your training, and all of these, adherence to your folklore. And that's really important. So this is something that I always try to present and just say, look, like, as you're going through, relationships as a corporate or as a startup, be mindful that this is how cultures are created. And in the next slide, I'll go into more detail and give you a little matrix of how to analyze that. But it's worth doing a little bit of time to understand the type of culture, because once that wheel gets in motion, it can't stop. It doesn't often stop with a corporate. Now, in a startup, that can change, because if you've got a limited number of people and you switch out the personalities, you can have a vast change in culture, and that's probably not going to happen in a corporate. And once you have your culture established, it leads you into this next thing, which is the vision wheel, which is a pretty common tool used out there, but a lot for marketing. But really helping the company understand, you as a startup or you as a corporate, what you are, right? Do you provide structure? Do you yearn for paradise? Do you want to leave a mark on the world? Do you connect with others? Your culture, if you start to look at this little wheel and the different segments of it, the spokes and the culture that you have, it really starts to align sort of, how your pieces work together. Now, to startup as well, what's kind of interesting is you have the opportunity to really influence this, right? So from the very beginning phase, you can sort of like, spin the wheel of fortune here and choose which one you want to be to some extent, and then help bring people into the organization that, solidify with your culture. And if you follow these kind of steps, you can really influence that very well. But one thing to really note, I call here the lone pioneer versus the organized polis. A startup it's a pioneer. It's a Wild West. I mean, you're out there looking for adventures. You're, changing the landscape while you get there. You're meeting new people. You're a one-man show, one-person show with a limited group around you. And if you're a corporation, you're a metropolis. You've got rules, you've got hierarchy, you've got laws, bylaws, you've got all sorts of things that you have to work within. And the startups don't have that. So I think you can kind of see here, this is going to start to lead into some issues that you might see in the future, which I'll identify. But going a little bit deeper into this Pascal framework, basically looking at your entry-level candidates, the experiences and the org's values, the in the trenches, on the job training. All of these things are just completely different in a corporate and a startup. So take reinforcing folklore, right? But that's something that's very strong. This is that second to last bullet point here, or line. Very strong in every organization. And this is one where you can really, really assess the health of an organization or the culture of an organization by understanding their folklore. So when you meet somebody from a corporate, you're not immediately just going to understand how they were trained in the trenches by their mentor, or you're not going to understand, you're for sure probably not going to understand their their rewards and their bonus structure, right? And as you're a startup, your reward and your bonus structure is sell the company and make your equity worth as much as possible, not like, try to adhere to the specific milestones that you had set out for the quarter and no more and no less. And a lot of that comes out in the folklore. The folklore is just stories that people tell about the organization, stories that people tell about other people in the organization. At a startup, the folklore is developing. You're building that folklore, and every instance and interaction you have, even with a corporate or internally, is building that folklore. Employees are becoming famous internally. They're getting labeled as the somebody of the something. And in the corporation, it's just a little bit more regimented, but you will hear different stories. You'll hear different you'll see different types of personalities. You'll see the way the teams interact with each other, and you can kind of derive sort of how the rest of the organization works. If you really focus on that, the people and the conversations are your window into the rest of this. But there's some other things that are just very different too, like the expectation of your on the job and in the trenches training. A corporate's going to have formal training programs and specific roles, and they're going to have like career paths and things, right? And in a startup, you're going to have a small, tight-knit culture of people that you've selected to come through this journey, but you're not really going to have mentors or supervisors. I mean, it is the Wild West. And you can just see like these two things are throughout the rest of this conversation, this presentation, these things are going to start conflicting a little bit. Just the cultures themselves, like even no matter how much people want to work together, the cultures can start to hit some issues. So this is also further exacerbated by the differences in corporate and startup strategy. So a startup strategy, the Achilles of the world, I mean, you're looking at best 6 months out. You might have put together like a 3-year business plan to try to get funding, which you maybe have a 10-year model that says you're going to be worth billions of dollars. But if you're a corporate, you've got a 3 to 5 year strategy. You've got a 2 to 3 year like strategy cycle that you are executing to like clockwork. You are maximizing shareholder value. In a startup, you're maximizing shareholder value just in a slightly different way. You're trying to get to a liquidity event. And the people reinforcing these strategies is a little bit different, right? So a startup, and I say this, it's kind of paradoxical in and of itself, but a startup is a person and a corporation is a person, right? So we've all been very well versed, and if you're going to business school, a corporation is a person, and every person who works in a corporation is shepherding and doing their part as a cog in that person that they are trying to maximize the value of. A startup is much more of a person. It is led by a strong leader, most likely, usually. And everybody is kind of adhering to that leader's values, and that one leader is able to make flexible, nimble decisions, and they're steering a speedboat versus a cargo ship. And those are very subtle nuances, but extremely important, because a corporation has real frictions and restrictions that it cannot get around, and it cannot move as quick as a startup wants to move. And it is very regimented by its nature, and a startup is very unregimented by its nature. So what does this mean, right? So for the first set of takeaways here on culture and strategy, let's go back to the culture, right? So personalities just may not mesh at the operational level. And what does this lead to? This leads to a tendency to blame the other party for any issues that may arise, and causes just general tension, right? So you may be working with a program manager inside of a corporate, and you really want to, you see that this project has an issue. You're working on a 3-week sprint, and you're like, we just have to change. And they say, we got to go through the process. Yeah, I'm sorry. So one of the things that can be really important as a startup and as a founder is keep the founder involved in critical deals and critical corporates, and understand that the team may not be trustworthy or experienced enough to deal with the culture mismatch. So some of the issues that we've seen over time is like, you just sort of throw a bunch of team members at it that are new, they have no mentors, your culture is evolving, and you put them in with a bunch of corporate resources, and all of a sudden, you just end up having a bunch of issues, but you don't really have a good escalation path to communicate the issues in your organization. And because that person might be a VP that you hired, and a VP would handle these issues. But when you're a 4-person organization, a VP like is just the worker, right? So, you know, the founder can be a really good person to break the tie in this case and to try to negotiate that. And you've got to have a little bit of that, you know, sixth sense to be able to handle that. And for corporates and executives at corporations, one thing I would say is, you know, this is really hard to do because you're in your culture. It's almost nearly impossible, but determine if the participants in the project are politically there or if they're there because they should be there. And I know that just maybe sounds terrible, but like, you know, in a corporation, there's politics, I mean, that's just the point of it, right? And so, you know, you really should assess if a project is failing. Do not immediately blame the startup. Look at the situation and the cultures and the peoples that are involved with it, because there's a lot of different factors and it is just everyone's nature to just blame everyone else. The next thing is the levels of accountability and engagement. As I mentioned before, you might have a VP in your company as a startup working with a, you know, just a program manager and a corporate. But maybe, and this has happened to us a few times, we go to an executive and we go sell a great vision and a deal. And the executive's like, I want that. I love that. I love your idea. Now go do it. And you get into the next round of people and you're like, wow, absolutely nothing is happening. Because the executive probably thinks a lot like you do. They're ambitious and they want to do it, but they have what Dennis Chikasey and Booth taught me, the concrete layer underneath there where, no, like then the group gets in and they say, look, we have our culture, we have our goals. My goals are out through Q4 of this year. Like, why would I disrupt what I'm supposed to do and I'm not going to get any credit for this? So there's so many layers. So one thing that we really have struggled with over time was assuming that when you get the executive buy-in, it's just immediately going to translate to the rest of the layers of the organization. As an entrepreneur and as a startup, you really have to focus on building consensus across every level of the organization you're working with. And that's going to be really hard. It's not your nature to do it. You don't work at a corporate because you don't want to do that. And so you're just going to have to figure out how to do it, whether you hire someone to do it or whether you really just kind of do that. But you are breaking the ranks of their organization. When you go to their executives and you close a strategic deal, you have by default short-circuited their whole entire chain of command. And you're going to be living with that through the rest of the time that you're working with that company. And for the corporates, it's kind of the inverted side of this, you know, it's got to be okay for your team to break ranks. And this is, again, I think the corporates have the harder part of this. The startups have like more mental anguish, but the corporates, it's harder to get out of their own way, which is intentionally built that way. But it's got to be okay for someone who may not usually interact with the higher level to be able to go interact with the higher level and get that level of exposure and get that level of communication. And that's just a really hard task to actually execute. We call it just finding champions. I know it's a pretty normal term, but you know, you really get the right champion that's empowered by the right organization. And look, that could be someone who's there politically in order to do that, right? So you can work within the bounds of the corporation, but it's really critical to do that. And then the last thing is the pace of decision making. And this can just foster significant resentment between the two organizations because you've got a tortoise and you do have Achilles. And so, you know, if you're a startup working with a corporate and you push too hard, you will ruin your reputation within that organization, and it will be painful. And then one thing to remember as a startup working with a corporate, people don't stay at the same corporation forever. So they are going to go to another company and another company and another company. And if you push too hard, you think you have too much air cover and you were wrong, you might have damaged your reputation and your capabilities for a long time. And so that's something you have to be really, really cognizant of. And from the corporation perspective, like providing information to the startup is very critical. Timelines, key decision makers, documented, how the process actually works, right? Having a formal escalation path. Don't leave the startup just to figure it out on their own because they probably don't know how to navigate it. And what they're going to do is just go do what they do. They're going to try to overcome obstacles. They're going to try to short circuit the system and everything. That's their nature, right? So you kind of have to try to build the guardrails so they feel like they're flexible, but they're not just, you know, wreaking havoc in the organization. And there's multiple different ways that corporates can actually think of. So I'm gonna jump over to corporates here for a second, and then tie this into startups. And no good presentation, can live without some physics references. But so corporates, you've got to calibrate to your interaction of what epoch you want to work with them in, right? And I like to equate it kind of to I think the Big Bang is a great analogy to this. When you've got the Big Bang and everything's just sort of first coming to fruition, that's kind of like the incubation phase of startups. Once something kind of goes from, okay, it's coming into being and it's got this cosmic microwave background radiation and afterglow and it's cooling off, that's your investment phase, right? That's where you're like, look, I know this thing's here. It's probably going to turn into something. Let's invest in it. And then when you've got this whole 13 billion years of universe and matter has formed and it's expanding, well, that's your internalization, right? That's your actually operationalization and bringing this into the organization. That's going to be the bulk of the rest of the time, where eventually you find different ways to partner. So, corporations looking to work with startups should think of which phase they want to work with. So incubation is just going to be a little bit different, right? It's going to be hands-on. Probably you're going to set up a formal accelerator. So incubation is much more like bring them into an environment, bring them into your resources, get them acclimated with your team. Corporates should be using the incubator as an incentive tool for their own organization. How cool is it to be able to go work in an incubator with a bunch of startups as part of an internal sabbatical? So there's a whole bunch of value to an incubation. But, the issues can be, you can distract the startups, right? Because you can actually start to they become your pet project, and all of a sudden you're just, get fawning over them and not really pushing them to work. And you can also get a false sense that anything is possible. Because anything is possible, it doesn't mean you can internalize it and turn it into a real universe, right? Can be very distracting. Now, you can also go the investment route. So, Series A to Series C, D, E, whatever series you want to get into. And this is actually just a little different. Usually this requires more of a corporate VC arm, formally set up, formally structured as a corporate VC. This may or may not have commercial ties to work with the companies. We've seen some commercial VCs that are just investing for a return and some that are investing strategically. But when you get into that investment phase, look, the incubation phase is great. You can all be rah, friendly. It's good. You're going to, eat pizza together. When you get to the investment phase, look, now are you commercializing them or not? Are you investing or not? Are you trying to take a board seat or not? Like, the levels of influence you try to exert here can significantly change the trajectory of a company and the trajectory of your investment. And I'll talk about the opposite of this on the startup side, but that's something really, really to consider. And then if you're trying to internalize the investments you make as a corporate, you have to get business unit buy-in. And in an ideal world, I can't say I've really seen this done perfectly anywhere, give the investment team the budget and authority to manage the pilots and the internalization. And that one is that's a really hard thing to do, because no business unit wants some innovation person telling them what to do. And this is where your hierarchy starts to get into issues. And then lastly is the internalization. So this is where you're actually getting into a commercial engagement between a startup or something that's coming out of the startup phase. Now you're gonna have to start dealing with dynamics. You have to understand how influential this innovation is going to be and this company is going to be to your organization, and put the right resources on accordingly. If it's like an Excel plugin widget, like, great, give everyone access to it, right? If this is a massive overhaul of a fully financial system that is regulated and it's a newer company, boy, you're gonna have to be very, very careful of how you implement this. You've got to make sure that you've got a nice single point of contact, and that an executive owns the risk taking within the organization. So you need, really, what's key for the internalization we've seen is one executive that owns the budget, that owns the project, that can overcome all the hurdles, and then a champion internally that's really close with that executive that can go navigate all of the stuff within the internal corporation, because a lot of stuff is going to happen that you don't expect. Now, on the flip side of that, from a startup perspective, if you're in the incubation stage, great. Corporates can give you a ton of credibility among customers. They can give you pilots and early access, industry resources, and seed capital. But the issues that can happen is they can learn from your ideas. Now, it's highly unlikely they're just going to steal what you do, right? But boy, they're going to learn how you think, they're going to learn what you do, and they're going to borrow components of it. It's just going to happen. You're going to train them how to be a better organization, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. They're giving you money, you're giving them something in return as well, right? You can completely get steered in the wrong direction. You can be hampered, and like it can completely hamper your ability to pivot. And it can give you complacency to stay in the incubation phase. And a story from us is, when we were incubated in the Lightbank incubator, these are, Brad at Kiwa and Eric Oskowski that started Groupon. And we loved that incubator. We never wanted to leave that incubator. Like, they had to pull us kicking and screaming and kick us out of the building to get out of there. Like, even when we first had to move, we moved to an office right next door that had a glass window in there so we could still see everybody, because there's all these entrepreneurs in there and like your friends, and you're like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave, but like, you got to leave and you got to grow up and you got to get out of it. We probably stayed there a year longer than we should have. So that's just something to keep it, it's real. Your personality and your emotions do matter at that stage, and it can hold you back. From an investment perspective, look, it's great. You have the potential to connect with high level commercial staff within the corporate's innovation arm and their business units. You can get a serious pilot going. And look, corporates and strategics give higher valuations than a traditional VC, right? That's just because you have different value to them than you do to a traditional venture capital fund. But risks. Other potential strategics could block you out if you have somebody on your cap table, especially if you have somebody on your board. So be very careful about board appointments. And one piece of advice I would give there is fight for board observership and not actual board membership. It's okay to have board observers. Having a board member of someone who's a potential strategic competitor can be a little, dicey at times. You do not expect just to open the door and run in and start having them use your product everywhere. Very, very often the investment and the incubation and the commercial arm is not fully tied into the business arm. And then also be very mindful of your valuation. A high valuation seems great on paper, and it's great to, tell your friends at a cocktail party and feel good. But when it comes time to an exit, or it comes time to raise another round from a traditional VC, it comes due. And so you don't want to do a down round. You don't want to be stuck in a company that you can't exit. So valuations seem great, but trust me, the dilution you take by a little bit lower valuation can be well worth it if you can actually sell your company, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, for forever. And then lastly, when you get into the internalization phase with the corporates, launching a product in a live environment, that's awesome, right? And you get a lot of revenue, right? From a deep-pocketed customer, that's great. But of course, the exact opposite to that is you very likely will have customer concentration with one firm that invested in you, which then hurts your valuation and hurts your prospects and hurts all of these other things, right? And then you can really become overly influenced by one partner versus understanding the market needs, depending upon how you structure it. I'll go through that a little bit more here, but there's a real opportunity for the corporate to start driving your roadmap and really distract you from what the market is looking for. And it's really hard to understand you're in that until you're like 6 months into it. And then all of a sudden, once you realize you're in it, your heart sinks. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this, right? So how do you find the right partners, right? And what do you look for in a specific partner as well? So, a couple of things that we've done and seen that have worked, right? Reading 10Ks for a public company is great. I mean, it's wonderful. They have to divulge everything there. You can see kind of a lot about the company, who the key stakeholders are. You can talk to references. Almost every big corporate now has some sort of an arm for corporate innovation. They've done it before. Just find the people on LinkedIn that their innovation person's on the board of and just start reaching out to them, right? You've got to really decide if you want an investment or a partnership or an incubation. So understand your epoch, understand where you are. And find a partner when you start talking to them that is willing to put real skin in the game by committing resources and dollars. Like, you do not want somebody who's just kind of passively involved in you at certain stages. And you do want a partner as well that's going to give you credibility and willing to share its market and its marketing resources with you. So that's been something really critical at our company and many companies I know of, is like being able to do the press release, but even more than that, being able to go to a trade show together, being able to be on stage together. You can absorb credibility from your strategics by being on the same page with them, because you're here and they're here. And if you get their interest enough to bring you up here on stage, you're on a great trajectory. And from a corporate, what to look for in a startup, culture fit is really important. And even if you have this initiative from senior executives to go be innovative and do everything or whatever, you should really assess the culture and make sure that it's a good fit, because you're going to be investing. One can even argue that the corporate resources are more expensive than the startup resources, because you've got to allocate budget to everything. And so you've really got to make those investments, even of your people, make it very seriously, right? Two other things that I'll say, which I wish people never did for us, but you should always do, is ask for the financials of the company and get all their security information, right? Like, you really, really should do that. I mean, and every startup's going to push back on it, but you never know what's on the other end of that curtain. You have absolutely no idea. And so I could go in story after story when we first started up of that, but that's the age-old back and forth that will always happen with that. And so, moving over to the right-hand side here a little bit, just some more tactical ways to find some folks. So trade shows are great, meeting trade shows. There's so many more of these that have come on board in recent times, whenever we can actually go back to them. PR and branding. People listen to PR. Putting out a press release is like a few $100. Getting a PR firm is a few $1,000 a month. 100% worth it. Perception is reality in the market. You've got to make yourself look big and act as if until you get there. And partnering with existing customers, like in the value chain. So one of the things we did early on was we worked with suppliers to the big players in our industry. So we went to all the people who were their suppliers, and they were much more open to talk to us, because they're business to business companies, and these people we were talking to were business to consumer companies. So we actually kind of like piggybacked on with some of these big partners, and then got introed into the big companies we were actually trying to sell to. And we also just weren't afraid to pick up the phone and call a CEO every once in a while, right? Like, CEOs are great, executives are great. They're going to see your vision. They're going to want to work with you. And there's a bunch of retired advisors that are these sages in the industry. Look, those are great too. They're expensive. They're usually going to be pay to play, but they can be valuable, and really don't make them mad, because they'll really hurt you if you do that. Look, you can be crazy too as a startup. At one point, we were trying to win a deal with a huge insurance carrier in Central Illinois, and we just couldn't figure out how to get to them. So we just went and bought all of the billboards in Central Illinois and put all these really catchy phrases. We called it karaoke. It was all these 80s songs with these silhouettes that would just get stuck in your head when you saw it. Literally a week later, we got a phone call from their team and kicked off an engagement that is one of our larger clients today. So look, think outside the box. That's why you're a startup, right? So corporates, building a VC or innovation arm, there's a lot of consulting firms out there that'll help you do that. And I'd recommend it if you have the capital to do it. It's great for a whole host of reasons. But also having a seasoned executive team of mixed, innovative minds, and I say innovative, not young. Okay, young people are innovative, right? And not all more seasoned people are not innovative, right? So you need veterans, you need people who understand your organization, but you just need innovative people in the company. And you should be leveraging your own business and PR and marketing resources as much as you can with the startups, and especially if you decide to partner and invest with them. Do not be afraid to jump in and help them out as much as you possibly can. But look, advisors can be expensive. As a startup too, one other piece of advice is big names. Hiring big names has its pluses and its minuses, right? And we've seen it every which way. And so just keep that in mind. It'll go back and forth. And with a corporate, be careful of putting too restrictive of provisions in your contracts with your startups, right? Too restrictive of exclusivity, and you're just going to kill the company. You're going to smother it. It's going to do the opposite of what you were actually trying to do with it. Now, let me go back here. This will be the most technical slide here, and I'll just leave this with you all as a reference. But for some of the students out there that haven't done a lot of, or entrepreneurs who haven't done a lot of deals, couple of different layers of deals. NDAs, not really worth anything, but you just have to do them. Joint marketing agreements are great, because then you start to promote together, but there's not really much behind it. But it is an acknowledgement you're going to work together. A teaming agreement starts to get better, and these all have different flavors of like MOU, LU, whatever, but LOI, I don't know. But teaming agreement, like now you're going to commit to actually working together and doing a little bit of go-to-market. Now, the thing you have to keep an eye on in a teaming agreement is if you try too hard to structure your go-to-market and do these labeling of the accounts you're going to go after or whatever, you have no idea how you're going to find certain accounts. You may end up owing someone a commission on an account that you win on your own. So be very careful in a teaming agreement type of relationship of like how you structure your commissions or otherwise things like that. Then along with that, all of these can have exclusive partnerships in them, right? Which, I mean, are very hard to execute and navigate. We've done quite a few exclusive deals, and I think almost every single one of them we've ended up renegotiating at some point, right? It's just, it's good for a point in time. It can help you jumpstart things, but again, it goes back to that too oppressive of terms, suffocation of the potential relationship. And then there's joint ventures and M&A and mergers and whatever, and that's all a little bit further down the line. Other key provisions to just keep in mind as a startup, ROFR, do not do a right of, that's called a right of first refusal. Every startup corporate's always going to ask for it. Corporate always asks for it, but never do it. You can offer a right of first offer, so a ROFR is the right of first refusal for the company you're working with to buy your company. So if somebody else comes and offers you $1, this company can be like, I'll pay the $1 and I'll take it. And you can see how that would decrease your valuation. But if you offer them the right of first offer, then you say, look, you can come offer to buy us at any time. What does that mean? I don't know, right? So usually the corporates aren't going to accept that, but you just don't have that provision in there. We've had people ask us for our source code before as well. So like our actual code. Look, I would say like, it's not a good idea. You can offer it for royalties, but also at the end of the day, if you're really early stage, like it's probably like, your source code is going to change a ton. And if you're like, look, I'll give you a snapshot of the source code for a bunch of money, and then I have the rights to derive off of it and work from it, it's a really risky maneuver. No one's going to recommend you do that. So I'm not going to recommend you do that. But I'm just going to say, like, risk. People are going to do IP licensing. Actually, IP licensing agreements are surprisingly, when you're doing joint development, impossible. Because like who derived what from what, you have no idea, right? So this is one of those where even if you put it in a contract, IP sharing or licensing, like enforcing it, I don't know what's getting, no one's going to know what happens. So I wouldn't fret too much about that. Warrants. So adding warrants to a company basically gives a partner a right to acquire stock at a predetermined price. It's actually a great tool. We've used that one quite a bit in deals where we say, look, but you've got to make them performance-based. So we said, look, if you partner bring us X millions of dollars a year of revenue per year, we will give you X number of warrants in the company. And one thing you'll notice is that, corporations are overly optimistic in their capability to help you. And startups are, willing to give this out. So as a corporate, I would say, try to set really, really attainable goals, and like then half the goals you think that are attainable. And as a startup, like, don't be afraid to put a warrant structure in there, because if it works and you're winning. And if it doesn't, you just cancel it out and they don't, nothing goes anywhere. Revenue sharing and gain sharing, a little harder to do. Gain sharing is like, look, if I increase some measure of profitability, I get some percentage of that. These are just really hard to measure. They're onerous to measure. So when you get as you get down into these other things and you get too complicated, it gets onerous. If it seems really hard and complicated, it's really hard and complicated, right? So you need to make sure you're at like a really good maturity level. Things like blocking rights, the different types of governance models and exclusivity, again, like these are just key provisions to keep in mind, and you all have access to these slides, so you can work through that. So, one of the last things to kind of hit on here is the actual people that are involved in this. So we've kind of put a little bit of a framework together of certain things to look at, but at the end of the day, this is Game of Thrones, right? I mean, you've got a bunch of personalities. One thing I love to do of the corporates we're working with and internally is just name them, right? So, it's great. Like the literature and things do a wonderful job of, exacerbating people's personality characteristics. Shakespeare did a great job with, dissecting tyrants and things, which is very important in the corporate world. But, it is kind of helpful to have a name for the types of personalities that you're working with inside of a corporation. So you internally can start to talk about it and build some sort of nomenclature about like, oh, this is I'm dealing with a little finger, like, oh, this is great. We've got a Jon Snow in there, right? So having that little bit of nomenclature and dissect, and this is just a small subsegment of like all the different types of personalities, but can be very helpful. And then recognizing the org chart differences. And so this is equally valid and important for corporates and for startups. Like a startup is typically going to have like a CTO or a VP of engineering, and like for a tech project, and a corporate's going to have like a head of IT. And the gap and chasm between IT and engineering is, just vast, right? So, usually an IT organization inside of a big corporation is like program management. They're managing consultants. They've got managed infrastructure. They're dealing with hardware. A tech leader in in a startup is designing, they're coding, they're architecting, they're solving problems, they're sitting side by side with the team, and they're solving the problems, right? So when you just try to throw your IT team together with a tech team from a startup, that can cause some frictions, right? These two people necessarily like don't speak the same language. So I would say tech organizations inside of startups can actually work a lot better with like business and product and project organizations inside of corporations, because they're going to help their visions become a reality. We've seen IT in a lot of the big corporations end up being just a lot of managed infrastructure and bureaucracy. So you really, as a corporate, have to understand what your IT is. And then if you want to change that, it's just a really big endeavor to change that. But I mean, these things are all a little recursive. You can go back and use the incubation and the investment and the internalization of new technology to break you of those traditional habits. But that is then starting to upend a lot of your infrastructure and your culture and a whole different, neighborhood inside of your polis there that you're trying to pull out. So you can't just level it and expect it to grow back, in a totally better way. Last but not least here, it's just a little note on some execution items here, right? So these are four specific areas that I think have come up consistently for us that I would advise everybody to consider, right? So one is having if you're going into a major project, have a steering committee and have a balanced steering committee. Ensure that there is neutrality in there, and that it is not completely influenced by one group or the other. So especially when you're working with a large corporation, you do want some oversight in that corporation. You don't want your whole steering committee to be stacked with the people that are using the product or project, right? And likewise, from a startup, you need other opinions, like I mentioned before, like having the founder involved can be very, very important. Make sure you document the roles in the process, and then startups, follow it. Most startups are not going to follow the steering committee procedures. It's counter to you, but you have to follow it. That's the way the corporates speak. And so you've got to just take the extra time. It's going to seem like a waste and stuff, but it's really important. I would highly recommend against milestone-based payments as a startup side of things as well, because it kind of like the corporate starts to sort of have some pretty significant influence on you and can start to impact your roadmap, and they start to hang money over your head. So I would say only agree to milestones if it's your delivery and it's not contingent on their acceptance of it at all. Their internalization of it or anything. Like, it's just got to be the work that you've done, you get paid for. Your time is too precious to be distracted by trying to figure out all these little things to get a payment. From a corporate perspective, you've got to find a way to let the startups be startups. If you're trying to influence them too much or put too much structure in, it's just hard. And as a startup, on the bottom, they're like, you just can't be afraid to say no. It's like impossible to say no, but like, if you're being wrangled in and you feel like you're working at a corporation, like it may not be the right thing for you. And then lastly, committing resources and failing fast. The budget needs to be known, and the budget needs to be clear, and you've got to understand exactly like what's going to go into it and have the resources available. As a corporate, it's probably going to cost you more than you think. I mean, there's all sorts of different budget allocations that go on from testing and program and project and everything. And, when we've gone into any big project, like it goes over budget. It just sort of is what it is. And as a startup, like you've got to understand, again, this failing fast, like you're going to be in for a long ride. So, get ready for it. So just kind of summarizing things here, and then we'll open it up for questions, right? I mean, so ensuring you have the right groundwork, picking the right partners, culture fits, understanding strategy, and then some of the technical nuances of structuring and avoiding pitfalls, understanding people's personalities in the organization and the people that you're working with, and then making sure you have some good governance model in there that's neutral and that can actually be utilized to help the whole project. So with that, I think I'll just open it up to Q&A. Thank you all for this opportunity. I really appreciate it and look forward to hearing some questions here.
Thank you so much, CJ. This was a great presentation because there's so many layers and nuances to these relationships, and any presentation with a Game of Thrones reference and a Greek myth thrown in is a presentation that I can get behind. So
Love it.
Feel free to leave any questions for CJ in the chat. It looks like we have someone with their hand raised. Rudy, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead.
Sorry, I probably should leave a comment in the chat, but it's a chance to meet someone, so why not, right? Thank you so much for the presentation, CJ. It was very informational. I feel like I was able to understand some of them, but some of them I think I will need to rewatch later on to absorb them. But overall, I really appreciate your taking the time to give us a presentation. So my question is, like at the beginning stage, like how do you evaluate an entrepreneur idea, whether to pursue it or kill it? Sometimes, like, what kind of criteria do you use to help you evaluate that? Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, what that'll come down to, that's a very open question. I'll try to frame it in this corporate context. How a corporate evaluates an entrepreneur, and that comes down to, again, understanding the culture and the strategic vision of what your specific corporation is trying to do, and then evaluating the entrepreneurs for how their idea adheres to that, and how that entrepreneur is going to work within your culture. So from that perspective, it really just depends on why the corporate went into that, either the incubation phase or into the investment phase or into the internalization phase, what problem they're trying to solve. And then, like, who is the right fit for that, right? And at the early stage, it's a lot more of feel. It's a lot more of working with the people who are running, like whoever you have running your incubator, and whoever you're talking to that's running the incubator is really important, because that's going to be the feel and the culture fit there. They're going to be your, like, your surrogate of the culture up to the organization. As you get a bit later in stage, most corporates are probably going to start hiring consulting firms to do really big market surveys and just sort of find strategic fits. It becomes a little bit less about kind of that feel there.
I see. Like, but also, like, from either would you recommend? Sorry, like a follow-up question for that is: would you recommend, like, an entrepreneur need to do some sort of a market research to understand better? From an entrepreneur perspective, like whether, like, his or her idea is an idea to pursue?
That's a whole nother conversation. I think probably well suited for another day. So I apologize for deflecting that one.
No, I completely understand. Thank you so much for answering, like, part of my question.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you, Rudy. It looks like EJ has his hand raised if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, CJ, thanks so much. That was a great presentation. Katie, I just wanted to alert, I think the chat's disabled, so folks might need to voice their questions. CJ, one of the things that we see oftentimes with startups is that they end up in a place of indecision as they start to talk to corporate partners. How do you think about driving an ultimate yes or no as you're beginning discussions with corporates to not be left in the middle ground?
So when you say, like, indecision or yes or no, is like which corporate to work with, or should you work
with?
No,
more like, in particular, I think in financial services, we tend to see this quite a bit where, you're interested, you want to work together, but, you're not actually driving toward a partnership, but you're not getting a yes or a no in terms of how to work together.
Yeah, that's hard, because that's why I said, like, finding the right corporate is somebody who wants to work with you and is willing to start putting their resources behind it. And if you're kind of in this sort of like crisscrossing, are we, aren't we phase, like, I'd say it's more on the entrepreneur to push that relationship to the next level and to find the way to do it, right? That means you either, like, go up to the executives, or you, like, one time, we were in one of those phases with a corporate, right? And we couldn't figure out what to do. So basically what we said is, look, we will just build your platform for you in the next month and give you an MVP. And if it's good enough, will you work with us? And they said, yeah, fine. Right. And we were a little later stage. So we rented a house in the Silicon Valley and sent our whole tech team down there and locked them in there for a month and made them code this platform. And it came out, and this is one of our greatest partners that we have now, right? But it was on us. We just said, look, we're in this back and forth phase. We're just going to go do it. So, really, that's a great question, and that is a hard one. That's kind of a little bit of the crux of it. Of like, you also like have to know when to cut bait and say, look, I get it that this is great, but like, I probably just need to go pursue some other things and continue to get my own interest, and then keep bringing it back to them as evidence points that this is really happening. But if a corporate wants to work with you, they're going to work with you right away. If they say they want to work with you, but they can't figure it out, you've got to go figure something else out and keep coming back to them. And if they're just kind of back and forth, like, you've got to have that feel. But my recommendation is like, just go do something else. But don't like cut them off, but like find ways to engage them, right? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, CJ. Looks like Dan has his hand raised if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Yep, thanks, Katie. And CJ, thanks a bunch. This is awesome. And it's clear you've put a ton of effort into organizing your thoughts and reflections and law experience. So greatly appreciated. Question is this, can you talk about kind of tangible milestones or that you need to achieve or efforts that you need to put in to sort of build trust and credibility, especially when you're early stage, for corporate partners that might have, some concerns, fears, want to see some kind of stability, so to speak, in terms of brand protection and or information security, or really any other factor that's a big, do we want to partner with this startup kind of concern? And how do you mitigate those?
That's great. Yeah. So number one is like, there's the courtship, right? So like a lot of it is building the relationship with the right people in the organization. And I would say milestone one is find your champion that is supporting you through that organization, right? So somebody who's going to tell you kind of the inside ball as to like what you need to do, right? Then you need to, in that case, you need to be respectful and listen to the corporate of the specific areas. If they're saying, look, we don't understand your security, or like, we don't believe this, or we don't know if you're still going to be around tomorrow, so we don't want to partner with you and do a big press release or something, right? You've got to understand that they have the high ground, right? So you've just got to make some sacrifices that sort of show that you're willing to commit to the relationship, right? So do some acts of service for them, or some things, right, where they start to gain trust in you, or other things on your own that help you gain credibility. This is where I mentioned before PR. You can just release an onslaught of press that makes you seem very credible with certain things, and that will help influence the strategic, right? So, I mean, it's a couple $100 for every press release you put out there. And so anything in any angle you can do to get that will help you establish credibility to kind of get to that next level. But at some point, you're going to get to the level where you both have to come to like some sort of a contractual relationship, and that's what you should be moving towards. And you're going to have systematically handled all of those issues. There's no real way to get around like tangible concerns they have about those things. But the credibility one, press can really help, and then just success and just working it out. But it can be hard if you're trying to do like, where one big company is like a really big person in the market and you finally got them and that's the one you want to go work with. Like, it's a tough spot, and that balance is really hard. But that's where you can use other mechanisms. Like, why don't you just give me a seed investment? Give me a seed investment. Let's do this. This is nothing to you. It's $50,000, whatever. Polsky Center is going to put 50 in too. Let's all do this together. Like, so there's other ways you can try to pull that together. And as soon as somebody gives you any money, you're in.
Yep. Yeah. Great point. Once the first check's written, the next 20 are pretty easy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, CJ.
Thank you, Dan. It looks like we have time for one final question. So Manish, if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. So hi, CJ. The question that I was thinking about is, at what level, right? When you're looking at firms that would be potential partners, say like, is there a market cap above which they would become interested in startups? Or is that a good way to think about it, like looking for potential partners?
No, I mean, look, not really. It just really depends on the company and what they're trying to do, right? I mean, even smaller companies have big investment arms and things, right? I mean, like really huge companies are going to probably have more capital and more initiative to do this stuff. And so they'll just naturally be around it more. But, you know, you're not going to do it with like some mom and pop $10 million revenue company. But anyone who's actually like a big corporate or someone who's public or anything, like it shouldn't really be a limit. It should be more from you from a starter perspective, like who's interesting to partner with.
A quick follow-up on that. So some of these companies, they have their internal venture arms. So if we're basically like, so some of them I know have a dedicated team that does look for startups to invest at early stages and so on. But like if I start looking at the larger map, does it make sense to approach a company that does not have an explicit venture arm? Does that indicate that they're not interested in something like that?
No. I mean, you can actually use that to your advantage too. I mean, when we first started working with all the companies we did, none of them had venture arms really, and a lot of our good partners don't. So that's just it's a choice. Like, so you can really get strategic value. It's going to really depend though on the executive you engage with and their strategic vision and their ability to push something through the organization. By the time somebody gets to a corporate VC or a corporate arm like that, they've got some initiative to it, and they've gone through some level of friction in the organization already, and like something, you know, like that, unless you're their first investment. So, you know, it's probably going to be a little harder. It could be a little harder for you if, or it could be a little easier. You could get a smaller organization with a strong executive that just says, go do it. And that's great. Right? So it's really just going to be a little different.
Right. And one final follow-up. Does the person that you're looking for to be your champion at that organization, does it have to, like, it shouldn't be like, you know, like an entry-level employee, that much I understand. So, but like at what level or above should they be in order to some weight?
It really doesn't matter. You know, if the entry-level employee is the daughter of the CEO, phenomenal, right? So like, it just really depends on who can be the champion. So we've seen it of all different shapes and sizes. It's just somebody who's got a lot of like, somebody who like, there's these little connector people in there, right? That kind of have this influence, and they see a lot of things, and they've got a little bit of a voice. So it's most likely not going to be an entry-level person, but they've got a little bit of a voice, but they're not up at the high level making the high decisions. They're down enough to where they know how to work the system without flagging things up too much, right? And so that's, you need to find that person, and that some organizations don't even have them, but you know, that's the right level. And there's no specific title that's in there, but it is someone who's usually kind of in that middle layer.
Okay. Thank you.
Great questions, everyone. Thank you so much for being so engaged during this presentation. And thank you, CJ. I definitely learned a lot throughout this, and I'm sure everyone else on the call did as well. CJ, is there anything you would like to leave the people with before we sign off for today?
No, thank you all for attending. I appreciate you taking some time to do this. And I'm assuming, Katie, there's some way if they have more questions, they can get to me, or like the presentation can get out or something, but happy to share the slides if people want them.
Yeah, if you just want to forward those along to me, I can send them to everyone.
Excellent. Okay. Great.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you, CJ. We should definitely have you back for another presentation soon. You're getting lots of thanks in the chat as well. But with that, we will sign off and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, CJ.